but the idea of doing it under one collectivity with some kind of legal authority sanctioning it was pretty much there right from the beginning, right from the times of Shaybani and Uzai and earlier people. And different arguments have been given. For instance, in modern times, Ghamidi has used the same verse and pointed out that words like ukhriju min diyarihim, that they were turned out from their homes, also point out to the same time period by which the independent Muslim collectivity had been formed. And one could, as you very rightly pointed out, argue that this was a non sequitur. Maybe there were other factors, power, but regardless of that, the mainstream Muslim tradition has always accepted this notion. Maybe because of political reasons, maybe because the mainstream rulers could never afford fringe elements carrying out different jihads on their own. So when you look at people like Khawarij or people like the Nizari Ismailis, for instance, Al-Mawardi, who's one of the founding postulators of the theory of state, if you might call it that by some stretch of definition, was essentially trying to argue against the idea that somebody can just take the law into his own hands and declare a war against them. So whether for pragmatic purposes or for theological ones, the bare fact is that right from the earliest times, right from the times of the Khawarij themselves to modern times, mainstream Sunnis and also mainstream Shiites have always been against the idea of jihad without the authority of the collectivity. The only difference being that in the Shiites, the idea is that when the Ghaib Imam, the Imam who's in occultation, when he returns, then he'll have the right to declare that kind of jihad, which is for expansionist purposes. So this is a misconception that the mainstream Shiite scholars have some different opinion, and they believed in some kind of surreptitious militancy. I mean, the mainstream Shiite scholars have been very clear right from the 8th, 9th century that jihad can only be done under a legitimate ruler and only for defensive purposes, not for any aggressive or expansionist purposes, unless and until the Imam in occultation returns. It was actually the Nizari Ismailis in the 11th, 12th century who started fighting against the Seljuk Sultans, and there we have these notions of Hashishin, from which we have the English word assassin, assassinating different people, and Al-Mawardi, Ghazali, Nizamul Mulk, all these people wrote against this kind of insurgency against the mainstream ideas. And interestingly, you see, the thing is that even modern day Nizari Ismailis deny this construct. If you read Farhad Daftari's article, he will simply negate this idea. And we know of the Ismaili tradition that it's a continuing tradition in which the authority has not ended, the divine authority is not ended, it continues in the person of the present day Imam of the Nizari Ismailis. And if they have sort of forsaken the idea, then we can't really accuse even the Ismailis of present Ismailis of having those notions. So the question is, where in the Muslim tradition, except in certain fringe elements as the Khawarij, the name itself Khawarij in Arabic means people who are outside the tradition, you see. So where in the Islamic tradition have the mainstream Muslims ever advocated the idea that they can do jihad without the authority of their collectivity? Interestingly, in modern times, one of the main people who are considered to be the postulators of movements that became non-Iranic, that is Abul Ala Maududi along with Sayyid Qutb, actually chose incarceration when he protested against the government for not only I mean the jihad that he was or the war that he was protesting against was done by the state of Pakistan, but he was protesting against another condition which Moiz can expound upon, is that it has also to be it is also to be proclaimed. It can't be done in a covert manner. First, the state must also proclaim it. So these two conditions, along with the third condition, which again you can later ask Moiz about for foundational arguments, that if you have a treaty with some state you can't violate that treaty. If you have entered into a treaty with the UN, you can't violate that treaty and simply ignore it and start a jihad. So these three conditions, the authority of the collectivity, number two, that it has to be a proclaimed jihad, number three, that you can't do it in violation of treaties that you've already agreed upon, are conditions that are accepted by mainstream Muslims, both by the Shiites and by the Sunnis, right from the earliest times, 8th, 9th century, when the constructs were formulated in the first place, up to modern times. And always, right, as in the beginning and as it is now, there have been some fringe elements.
But you know,
and you don't use exceptions